However we go. Now, recording at 8. So November 7th, 1916. Lloyd George becomes Prime Minister of Great Britain. Lloyd George's leadership of the country is going to be sort of unique in a few ways, especially after the war. But ultimately, he is going to be the one that sees the war through to the end. And there'll be quite a few challenges that come along with that. By 1917, we're talking both sides of the conflict are pretty much exhausted. Keep in mind, Great Britain lost 85% of its military within the first 4 months of the war. So by this point, they're just struggling to get through it. And a lot of things are going to happen that greatly change the war. Germany starts getting desperate. So they start instituting unrestricted submarine warfare again, realizing that's going to antagonize the Americans, but hoping that they can gain the advantage they need in the time it's going to happen. They're also afraid that America's going to join the war anyways. So they got to end the war before that happens. And so something happens that finally caused the Americans to join the war. And that is the Zimmermann telegram. A telegram was sent to the German ambassador in Mexico. And this telegram proposed an alliance between Mexico and Germany, where Mexico would agree to invade the United States. Basically, keeping the United States busy in its own conflict in North America so it wouldn't send help to the Allies. Once the war was over in Europe, Germany then pledged to help Mexico in its war with America, where they would successfully invade and take over the territories that Mexico lost during the Mexican-American War, which included Texas and California, as well as a significant amount of the Southwest. The British intercepted this telegram before it got to Mexico and turned it over to the United States. This was an outrage and seen as the last straw. So the United States ends up joining the war. Now, an interesting note. There is a theory that the Zimmermann telegram was, in fact, a fabrication created by Great Britain to implicate Germany for something they did not do, because they were desperate and needed America on the side of the conflict. There's a few bits of interesting evidence. For instance, the telegram lines that stretch from North America to Europe, all but one of them were cut. And that one just happened to go through Great Britain. So it's like, why would Germany send a top secret message by telegram if the only way goes straight through Great Britain? So, there's all kinds of theories to it, and it's interesting. It's kind of irrelevant, I suppose, in the long run, because ultimately the U.S. joins the war regardless. Even if it was a fabrication, that type of threat can't be ignored. But just kind of an interesting thing, because what if, Either way, the U.S. joins the war. Then, the Russian Revolution kicks off. The Russian Revolution was basically something that had been brewing ever since the Crimean War. There was a lot of animosity amongst the Russian people against the Tsar. And time again, there were backlashes, there were the pogroms, there was the use of secret police, and the Tsar was intensely unpopular. Well, the war kind of sealed that deal. The amount of dead, the starvation, the expense, it just pushed people over the edge and they rebelled. And this is when the communists took over in Russia. Now, once that happens, a little while later, they signed a treaty with Germany ending the Russian involvement in the war. They just backed out of it and took care of their own problems. So the two-front war that Germany was fighting, and the West and the East, now becomes a one-front war, and they can bring the rest of their army to bear. To put that in perspective, if you're not quite following me, Germany basically had to split their army in half. Half of them were fighting the French and the British over here in Belgium and France. The other half was over fighting Russia. So that half that was fighting Russia now doesn't have to anymore, and they're going to come reinforce the side that's fighting the English and the French. So this is kind of an interesting question, because both sides are getting an advantage relatively at the same point. However, the German forces are just flat wore out. The American troops, as they're arriving, are fresh. They're able to attack pretty much right off the get-go. They don't arrive until June, but when they do come, they're coming not having fought a war for the past 4 years, 3 years. So ultimately, the American troops are going to have a significant impact on the war. I suppose you could argue whether or not the Americans won the war in the end, because obviously there were people fighting for 3 years, but it definitely is the thing that turns the tide for the Allies. I think there's anyone who would argue that point. It was July 17, 1917. King George V changes his name to Windsor. The reason behind that is the original family name was German because the families were intermarried. So by shifting away from that, it's setting all this anti-German sentiment even further. So it's kind of embodying this whole idea. Meanwhile, how do we deal with submarines? Well, again, we don't have radar, we don't have sonar. So the way we deal with them is by convoy. A bunch of folks traveling together. There's safety in numbers. If one ship were to be attacked, everyone knows there's a submarine around, and we can just start depth charging. Which, by the way, the way we find submarines is actually quite easy. You have bombs that you set for the fuses for a specific depth, how deep it goes before it explodes. You just start lobbing it over the side. Eventually you're going to hit something. It's like basically kind of like the principles of a shotgun. You just blow up everything, and it was effective. So it really started restricting how effective unrestricted submarine warfare could really be, because these aren't like modern submarines either. They're not underwater for months on end. They're underwater for a few hours. So, they're above the water most of the time. They only submerge when they're ready to attack. And basically, that just takes the advantage away. That is a bit of a conspicuous color. All right, here's some words for you: pandemic, reparations, collective security, and mandates. Now, first of all, let's start at the bottom. Mandates. Basically, these are rules you have to follow. Anytime you have an alliance with people, you have mandates. Furthermore, in the case of treaties, usually there's something that each nation has to do. As we're going to see, that's going to have a major impact later on. Collective security. The idea, again, is the safety in numbers methodology. Only this time it applies to nations. One thing that's going to happen at the end of the war is President Woodrow Wilson is going to propose a League of Nations, a group where all nations can meet together and talk out their problems, not needing war to settle their differences. Basically, Wilson's desire and plan and vision was to have a world without war. It doesn't come to pass, and we'll analyze why, but one of the principles of his ideology was collective security. Reparations are payments that are given by one losing nation to another winning nation at the end of a war. Generally, the idea is that the loser has to pay the winner for all the damages that they accrued over the course of the war. Of course, they also have to pay for their own losses and everything. So basically what it comes down to is who has to foot the bill for the war, and it's the loser. Now, why that's significant? The problem with war is that it tends to be cyclical. If one side wins a war, then the side that loses is going to feel angry and not going to like to pay these reparations. So they're going to try to get revenge later on and create this cycle where everyone's kind of like, every few years we're going to have a war with this person, now back and forth, and it goes on for centuries. It just perpetuates war. So Wilson's idea is no one wins. The war just ends, and we try to solve our problems. But here's the problem with that methodology. Great for America. We didn't accrue all these terrible things. Yes, we had lots of dead and lots of costs in the war, but not near so bad as France or England. France and England, their whole country is devastated. Their economy is flattened. They need this money to reboot their economy, And France especially wants to see Germany humiliated. They themselves lost a lot of face when they lost the Franco-Prussian War, and are looking for kind of making them sort of a scapegoat, bringing them low. So the situation is going to be that they demand these reparations be paid by Germany. Now, pandemics. Do you guys know what pandemics are? It's a disease, but it stretches a continent. It's so widespread through the entire continent. All right, at the end of the war, a flu pandemic strikes Europe. 10 million people die because of the flu in Europe. Now, this is one of those things that makes us kind of, what? Because, again, nowadays, the flu is so ubiquitous. Yet people die every year of the flu. That's one of the reasons why flu immunizations are incredibly important. And indeed, if you look at diseases that have been around since the 20th century, immunizations have effectively killed certain diseases. But that's also a bit of a hot topic issue right now, because there's an anti-immunization movement, basically, where people don't want to get their kids vaccinated for various diseases. And because of that, certain diseases are starting to come back, like polio. It's an interesting situation, let me just put it that way. Anyhow, February. One of the things we have to understand about the war is that it is a total war. Total war is a concept that is fairly unique to World War I and World War II. It means that a country's entire economy is geared towards the war. Sort of like we were saying yesterday, we're not producing televisions or refrigerators or any consumer goods. We're producing bombs and planes and guns and ammunition, all this stuff necessary for the war effort. To put into perspective of amplification, our Navy is the largest in the world. Literally, you can take every Navy in the world, right? And we are 2 to 3 times larger than that. And we only spend 16% of our GDP, our gross domestic product, on the military. So what would happen then if we raise that 16% to 50%, or 75%, or 100%? That's what happens during World War I and World War II. That amount of effort, that amount of money going in just jumps spectacularly. But that also means that these things we take for granted are no longer available. Like I said, consumer goods aren't being made. Another thing is resources that are seen as important for the military are reserved for the military, and you can't buy whatever you want just because you have the money for it. It's restricted. The way they restrict that is by rationing. And the way rationing works is they give you a little coupon book. And that coupon book, it has a certain amount of, I don't know if you guys have ever had like one of those like Subway cards or like Qdoba has them, where like you buy a certain number of burritos and then you get a 10th one free. It's kind of like that. Every time you want to go buy something, they punch your card. Once that card is empty, you can't buy it again until the beginning of the next month. So they restrict your access. It's sort of like food stamps or cards. You have a certain amount of you get to use in that certain month, and then you're out. And so what happened is in some cases, it became almost like a second currency. It's like, oh, you need some gas? Well, I'll trade you this punch on my gas token for, a punch on your sugar token or whatever. You have all kinds of little things going on. And in addition, families started pulling out all the stops. They would buy war bonds. They would actually grow vegetables in their front lawns, in some cases, to then can it and send it on to the military so there'd be food. Butter, margarine, and meat were rationed for the army. Again, high-calorie foods because soldiers use a lot of calories. Butter adds calories to everything. You guys have ever looked at an Olympian's diet before?
No butter.
How would it have like butter?
Oh my God, no.
Really?
Yeah, there's
Ew.
what was his name? The swimmer,
Michael Phelps.
Michael Phelps. Yeah, he had like I think for breakfast it was like 10 or 12 egg and toast sandwiches covered in butter.
How disgusting.
The dude, yeah, no, he had to eat something like 12,000 calories a day.
Yeah, because he burns so much more.
Yeah. And it's just like oh, yeah, I don't want to do that.
That'd be so gross. That's why they probably create Subway.
Well, I imagine that's gonna be one kind of refreshing thing. It's like I don't have to eat all this stuff, but part of the training. But March 3rd, the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk, that's what ends the Russian involvement in the war officially. So, at this point, kind of the question is up in the air. And the Allies begin the 100 Days Offensive. The 100 Days Offensive is their push into German territory. They start pushing back the German gains. On the first day, Black Monday, 100,000 German troops are captured. And part of the thing that makes it possible are tanks. Tanks break the stalemate. Any problem you have in terms of crossing no man's land, these are custom built to deal with. Machine gun bullets bounces off the armor. Bombs, well, landmines are no problem. If you get hit by an artillery piece, yeah, you probably take some damage, might even kill your tank, but it's also possible you just miss. Craters, well, look at the design of the treads. It's like a trapezoid, yeah? The reason is the center of balance, whenever it starts to go over to a hole, that nose dips down and grabs the other side and keeps on trucking. Furthermore, it's got this wheel on the back that actually keeps it upright, so it won't topsy-turvy. That's a burger tank. These are some of the troops that were captured. One thing I like about this picture is it kind of puts a human perspective into it, because they don't look angry, really, I don't think. They're mostly tired.
Yeah, they just look at it.
Yeah, I mean, they're getting like very little sleep. Yeah, and think about it. It's like this. What a breath of fresh air. You're captured by the enemy. I just get to sleep. No one's gonna kill me. There was one German company who turned because they ran out of cigarettes, which seems like really silly. But the thing is everyone smoked like crazy in World War I. And the reason, the military gave you cigarettes. That was part of your ration in the military. The reason is that tobacco is a depressant. It calms you down. If you're fighting for your life and you're constantly hyped up on adrenaline, it's the only thing that's going to calm you down. So, you can kind of see why that would be the case. People are stressed out. This is one of those punch cards I mentioned. Mr. House actually has one. That's the actual punch card his grandfather had, or grandmother, I think. But again, it shows like gasoline, 1 unit, punch it, and then once you run out, you're done. Now this is the Hindenburg Line, the last line of defense in Germany, the most heavily fortified point. This is where everything was going to be decided. And it was attacked September 29th, 1918. When that happened, basically the war is decided. After that, Germany is just a formality before they fully pulled out of the war. But even before the Allies got to Hindenburg Line, as they're pulling back, the Kaiser was speaking with the Allied leaders because he wanted a way out. Germany by this point realized that they couldn't actually win the war. So they were trying to find the best possible peace treaty they could, a mutual peace treaty. But the Allies weren't accepting that. Now, he was really liking what Woodrow Wilson was saying, because Wilson again was saying, hey, no one needs to win this war, let's just end it. And he's like, yeah, it sounds like a great idea. And so, thinking that this is the type of peace treaty that's going to be put in place, on November 9th, 1918, Kaiser Wilhelm II abdicates the throne. That's the end of the war, essentially. There still needs an armistice to be signed. That comes a little bit later. Basically, as communication lines rounded up, and as it becomes clearer and clearer that the war is over. Let's talk how the peace treaty holds up. Woodrow Wilson's ideas are called the 14 points. Next week, you will actually be reading. It's called the 14 points because it's 14 bullets. Literally, it's 14 points. And each point addresses one of the causes of the First World War. For instance, one of the clauses states that all treaties between nations need to be open and in the public view so that everyone knows whose allies are in suit, because secret treaties are one of the things that led to the war. That we need to have as minimal militaries as possible. And we need to have leading nations, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And again, Germany likes this idea. Britain and France, not so much. So Germany accepted the use of the 14 points to be the peace treaty on October 23rd, but it doesn't actually pan out. And the thing that's interesting about it is Wilson had a really hard sell on this 14 points, not just with his allies, but back at home. There was a few points in the 14 points that were really heavily debated in Congress. And eventually, there was a vote that denied the use of the 14 points. One of the big sticking points for that was the idea of mutual defense. The only power that can declare war in the United States is Congress, according to the Constitution. But according to this National Defense Pact, if one member nation is declared war upon, is attacked, then every other nation must immediately declare war on whoever is the aggressor and attack them. And that would actually be unconstitutional. Furthermore, if this was truly how things worked, you remember how the Ukraine was part of it, the Crimea was annexed by Russia? If that was the case, we would be in World War III right now, because we would have declared war on Russia, as with Great Britain, France, yada yada, all the members of the UN, and we would be in war right now. So there are some problems with that methodology as well. It gets to the idea of mutual assured destruction. You won't be aggressive because other people will be aggressive, but that doesn't actually frequently work. And we'll see why when we get to World War II. Ultimately, though, the armistice is signed on November 3rd between the Austro-Hungarian Empire and the Allies. Now, an armistice is not an end to the war. That's not a treaty. What it is an agreement to stop shooting, to stop fighting, to cease fighting. A great example of that is actually the Korean War. You guys know the Korean War at all? Anything after World War II? You guys know the TV show MASH? That's about the Korean War. Right, we're still fighting that war. It never ended. We just have an armistice with North Korea. But technically, we're still at war with North Korea. No. Well, we have in South Korea, but not North Korea. In North Korea, a number of times it's like, we're going to go attack South Korea, and they don't. Because of suicide. And then November 11th between Germany. So the Paris Peace Conference is where the war is going to be officially put to an end, and we're going to sign the Treaty of Versailles. As I pointed out, they reject the 14 points, but they do adopt the League of Nations on February 14th, and basically do everything else that Wilson didn't want to do. They blame Germany. They make Germany sign an admission of guilt, saying that they started the war, and because that they were the aggressive nation, they have to pay a reparation. Now, here's the thing. Did Germany actually start the war? No. But they need somebody to pay, and of the powers left, who has the money? The Austro-Hungarian Empire has fallen apart by this point, more or less, and the Ottoman Empire is collapsing. The only nation that has any money at all is Germany. And Germany and France have this bad reputation with each other, this bad relationship, and France is trying to make Germany pay. So they have to pay somewhere in the neighborhood of around $30 billion. That was the money back then. This was a time period where you could go to the movies for 25 cents and buy a house for $1,000 cash. To put that into perspective, today's money, I believe it's something like $600 trillion. As in, if they hadn't basically just said, yeah, we're not paying it, they would still be paying it today. Furthermore, the treaty is utterly humiliating. It limits the military in Germany to basically the size enough to have a parade. It's really small. And all this then compounds into the Great Depression, which happens in the early 30s, late 20s. And Germany's economy utterly collapses. So they are in a very bad way. They're basically the great enemy of Europe, which, by the way, is still, I think, a trend we see today. You see someone say, I'm from Germany, people immediately go, are you a Nazi? And it's why? It's asinine. It's no different than like someone be like, no, I'm American. Do you murder Native Americans? Do you own slaves? Because we're digging up history and blaming people for it. So it's the same sort of methodology. If they're vilified, they're embarrassed, they're angry, they feel betrayed because they thought we had an agreement. At least America, we're going to do 14 points, and nope, that didn't happen. So is it any wonder, with that compounded by desperation that the Depression brings out, that they're willing to listen to a guy who is telling them, hey, you're not bad at all, you're great. You're part of an empire that goes back centuries. You're part of a race that is the greatest race this world has ever seen. The only reason we're in the situation we're in now is because we were betrayed from within our own country and by the other members of Europe. We set up Germany to become Nazi. That's what this treaty does. It creates World War II. That's why I would argue that World War I is the most important event in the 20th century, because most of everything that happens in the 20th century comes from it. So, anyhow. We will talk more about that later. For now, let's call that good. Since we have a few seconds, let's go and load back up this guy. And I'm going to review it for anybody who missed it. You guys can just kind of not pay attention, I guess, while we're doing it. But the first part of the war, again, the battles that occur. The first battle of the Marne. Well, it's actually the first battle in the war, but it is a significant one because it's one of these first stalemate battles. Stalemate, basically, no one has the advantage. The first battle of Ypres ended the race to the sea, which the race to the sea, again, was basically this tactical thing. They were trying to get a flank. The Schlesien plan called for Germany to come through Belgium because, one, the geography was really bad throughout here, and two, it was heavily fortified by the French. They were just basically going around. Well, the problem is that was a neutral country, and they're blocked. So basically it becomes like a race to who can get the flank all the way up to the sea so they get that advantage. They both meet there at the same time. They fight the first battle of Ypres, and it's a stalemate. No one has the advantage. From there, other stalemate battles include the Battle of Verdun, the Battle of the Somme, in which you had this British bombardment. Now, again, you guys see this artillery shell over here. That's the casings from it. It was day and night for weeks before the attack actually happened. They thought every German was going to be dead. They weren't, because they had fortified heavily using concrete bunkers and things like that. So the battle didn't go as planned, and in the first day of fighting, 400,000 British troops lost their life. So the whole thing was just basically utterly catastrophic. These pictures also show some of the trenches that were dug in the north, which is a lot rockier than it is in the south. That's why it was so shallow. The Dreadnought Race was the arms race that occurred building dreadnoughts with these giant battleships that Germany couldn't really compete with Britain, so they in turn used submarine warfare. Now, unrestricted submarine warfare is where you basically don't announce that you're attacking. It's kind of seen as dishonorable and kind of dishonest because you're just attacking, they don't have a chance to defend themselves, but it's effective. But the problem was that the British, to counter this before they started using the convoy system, started hiding supplies on civilian ships, like the Lusitania, which happened to contain 16 Americans on board. And that ship was sunk. It killed the Americans. That really kind of ruined the relationship between the United States and Germany. We stopped selling weapons because of it and really focused more on the Allies. And we also issued an ultimatum: if you want us to stay out of the war, you'll no longer use unrestricted submarine warfare. They did, as we saw for a while. Then, the other thing was control of the Dardanelles, which is this waterway that is between the Mediterranean and Aegean Seas and the Black Sea. It's this little tiny land area, as you can see, and it was important because the Russian Navy was basically blockaded in the Black Sea, kept there by the Ottomans. And so the British couldn't break it, They couldn't get their ships through because it was heavily mined and defended with cannons, so they attacked by land. And by this point, they're mostly using colonials, folks from Australia and New Zealand and Africa, and they were just utterly wiped out, largely because of this guy, Mustafa Kemal. He was the commander and actually launched his career. He goes on to become the president of Turkey because of its successful defense. Strangely enough, it also launches the career of Winston Churchill, who was a terrible defeat for him. Then the Christmas truce occurred, which basically was where they had a party in the middle of no man's land. In 1914, 1915 began Zeppelin attacks in the UK. It was basically a psychological warfare tactic. And as I said, conscription had to be implemented in 1960 because they just ran out of volunteers. Many people in the military expanded that to married men on May 3rd. And then later, because so many men were at war, they needed somebody to run the country, so women were granted the right to vote in 1916. It led to a lot of this women's rights movement. These are all examples of propaganda that were spread throughout the United States, and then this is German, kind of promoting the war effort. That's it. Now, for the quiz tomorrow, as you guys are preparing, I would expect you guys to know, like, the battles, like what happened. Like, I might ask you a question, what battle ended the race to the sea? Be the first of three. Or I might ask a question like, what was the battle where there was the bombardment? And we would say the Somme. So things like that. So, just kind of factual.
I won't be here tomorrow.
Well, that's very unfortunate.
Yeah, can I sign this one?
Oh, now you want me to sign something for you.